Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 5 of week 1, and the topic of today's lecture is the notion of critical traditions, and we have been studying about the various features of critical theory and also what we mean by the concept of critical traditions, and we have also studied the various important significance of the critical tradition in our last 4 lectures. Today in this we will try to summarize what we have studied in the last 4 lecture, and then we will study or we will move beyond so called the critical theory associated with Frankfurt School to various other critical traditions, some of which we have already discussed in our last 4 lectures, but we will understand those traditions in terms of the prospects which are available before the so called Frankfurt School. And then we will have a brief understanding of some of the limitations which are being labeled by various scholars against the critical theory. So, let us understand what we have studied about the critical theory and critical traditions in the last 4 lectures. The first is we understood the broader and the narrower meaning of the critical theory. We have seen that we can understand the critical theory in 2 ways. One is the narrow meaning, which by this time we know that it is associated with the Institute of Social Research in Germany, which is also known as the Frankfurt School, and Max Horkheimer was the founding father of this school. It had a long legacy of various important scholars and philosophers like Adorno, Habermas, Erich Fromm and others, and it has contributed a lot towards building the epistemology of the critical theory tradition. So, that is the narrower meaning in which we associate the so called tradition of critical theory with the Institute of Social Research in Germany. But in the broader perspective, if you see the meaning of critical theory, that which aims at the critical analysis of the various injustices and oppression in the society with the objective of finding solutions, analyzing them so that the human emancipation from slavery and the various, you can say, the miseries of life can be eradicated. So, therefore, if we understand it from a broader perspective, then we know that there have been so many traditions, multifarious traditions in our history, which has raised voices against the various types of oppressive structure, whether it is the voice against the patriarchy, whether it is the voices against the capitalist system, or whether it is the voice against the domination of science and rationality, or the dominance of so called the technological innovation over the nature and also human beings, then criticism of postmodernity. So, there are multiple traditions and also movements which have been waged across the world over various issues against various forms of injustices. So, we have seen that all these movements, all these ideologies come under the larger umbrella of the critical tradition, which comprises of all those theories, all those movements which have been waged in the historical development of human civilization against various forms of injustices time to time at different places across the world. So, this is a broader understanding of critical tradition. Then we have understood the important differences between the traditional and critical theory. We know that the importance of critical theory and why a critical theory has been defined as such have been explained by Max Horkheimer. He has said that a critical theory is a theory which is having a practical objective, because its aim is human emancipation. It aims at relieving the human from all types of suffering. So, therefore, that is one of the empirical or practical objective which is different from the traditional theories. They may not be involved in the emancipation or in the emancipatory pursuits. He has basically identified that the analytical, or it should be analytical in nature, or the critical theory should be analytical in nature, or in other words he has said that it should be explanatory in nature. It should talk about bringing about change, and the third is that it should have a normative basis, because any theory can be considered as a critical theory if it tries to provide explanation about the various wrongs and evils in the society, then it is an explanatory theory. Then if it is talking about change and transformation, then it should specify the means and the various actors who can be engaged for bringing about change and transformation in the society. And the third is the normative basis. On the basis of what values and principles we can provide explanations to the various ills in the society, and on the basis of what norms we can provide for solutions to the various oppressive practices in the society. So, therefore, these are some of the important features which has been identified by Horkheimer to make a distinction, and moreover he said that the traditional theory not so much concerned with the amalgamation of theory and practice. Then it is also talking about making interlinkages between philosophy and social sciences. It is asking us to make connection between the facts and values. So, these are some of the things which we find are absent in the traditional theories, and in that sense he argues that it is one of the important feature of critical theory. Another very important distinction is that one of the primary purpose of critical theory is to criticize or to provide critique, which may not be one of the prime function of the traditional theories. Now, then we have studied some of the important proponents of critical theory and the various critical traditions. We have seen that along with the founding father of the critical tradition or theory, that is Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, then Habermas, then we have the name of Walter Benjamin, Erich Fromm, series of thinkers who have been associated with this school, and they have contributed to the growth and evolution of critical theory. And out of this critical theory, or you can say the objectifying the essence of this theory, various traditions have developed, and you know that we have associated the essence of critical theory to be found even in the Greek tradition. Socrates is considered to be one of the first important critical theorists. So, even the Enlightenment tradition is also a type of critical theory which we can incorporate in the larger canvas of the critical tradition. So, any theory which has made a criticism of the oppressive practices and calls for change and transformation, it comes under the broader canvas of the critical tradition. Then we have studied the historical background of critical theory, how it has come into being. We have studied in detail various features of critical theory, how it has helped in providing voices to the non-identity, to those who are at the periphery of the society, how they have inspired so many movements. We have seen them under the heading that is the significance of critical tradition. Then the most importantly, we have understood one of the very important phenomena of the modern society, which is alienation and reification. And both alienation and reification, they are linked with each other, and we have seen that how it has estranged the individual from his own self, from his surroundings, and from the work which he is doing. Erich Fromm has argued that how in the modern capitalist society, even the so called capitalist, even the managers and the bureaucrats and the property owners and even the consumers, they are facing the problem of alienation at multiple levels. So, this is a widespread phenomena, and this has been actually dealt with in detail by almost all the thinkers who belong to the critical theory tradition. Reification is the use of instrument for achieving certain purposes. We know that this has been a very important phenomena. We can find that in the case of the use of instrumental rationality also, where the reason has been used as an instrument to justify the domination over nature and also say the justification for domination over other human beings. So, therefore, you can see that we have studied in detail various aspects of critical theory and also critical traditions. We have also studied some of the various important movements which have actually challenged and criticized the so called dominant position or the oppressive practices in the society. We have talked about various ecological movement, we have discussed feminist movement, and besides that there are various other movements which have taken place against the various dominant practices in the society. So, with this brief summary of what we have been talking about in week 1, now we are going to move beyond the so called critical theory associated with the Frankfurt School to various critical traditions. That is how the Frankfurt School is moving from its narrow emphasis on the study of enlightenment and the so called the capitalist society to much more wider field, focusing on more issues, more divergent issues which have been previously untouched by the so called Frankfurt School. And in that way we can see the prospects of the growth of the horizon of the Frankfurt School of thought. Now, we will begin with the so called definition of critical theory given by Karl Marx. He has said that the critical theory as the self clarification of the struggles and wishes of the age. So, the objective of the critical theory is to self clarify the struggles and wishes of the age. So, the critical theory should respond to the various struggles of the age and provide explanation to that and provide solution to that. So, in order for critical theory to retain its relevance, as Marx underlined, it is essential that it uses this approach in new social context as the first generation of Frankfurt School did, because Frankfurt School originated in a particular social economic circumstances facing certain crises at that time. So, in response to that, the origin of Frankfurt School of Political Theory, it took place. Similarly, now our society is facing multifarious conflicts which are having so many different dimensions and which may not be similar to the crisis which the Frankfurt scholars faced. So, in order to retain its relevance, they should use these approaches in the new social context to understand newer forms of crisis in the society. Now, the contemporary critical theorists have continued this legacy by engaging with and theorizing in relation to the contemporary struggles, crises and practices. So, it is not that the critical theorists have not engaged with the diverse issues, but they have been doing it. They have been engaging with the latest issues, the contemporary struggles, the crisis, the practices, and they have tried to theorize and they have tried to analyze those crises and those so called struggles of the present times. They have engaged with a much wider range of emancipatory social movements than earlier generations of Frankfurt School, who focused more on class struggle and capitalism. So, the earlier focus of Frankfurt School, we know that it was to provide a Marxist interpretation. It was more on class struggle and the focus was more on class struggle, on capitalism and on the adverse effects of modernity and so on. But there are many other issues which goes beyond the so called the traditional concerns of the Frankfurt School, and I think one of the important aspect is that these scholars have engaged with these emancipatory social movements and they are focusing on issues which are of much divergent nature than what the Frankfurt School thinkers have emphasized upon. For example, now they have been focusing on issues like colonialism, racialism, subordination of women, ecology, etc. So, and besides that, there are other issues also on which they are contemplating and they are trying to develop their analysis. Now, contemporary critical theorists have expanded the horizon of Frankfurt School tradition by engaging with and making contributions to feminist theory, then critical race theory and post-colonial and decolonial theories. So, you can see that they are engaging with very vast dimensions or divergent fields, and they are dealing with various new crises which are emerging in the present society. And in that way, they have expanded the horizon of the Frankfurt School. So, they have been making contribution to the feminist theory, they have been making contribution to the critical race theory, they have been making contribution to post-colonial and also decolonial theory. Now, we know that Frankfurt School critical theory has emphasized upon interdisciplinary of the subject and also on connecting philosophy with social science and also theory with practice. So, these are some of the basic and you can say some of the primary feature of the critical theory. And the first is that it should be interdisciplinary in nature, and the second is that we have to connect philosophy with social sciences, which the traditional theories were not doing it, and the third is that we have to connect theory with practice. So, with these basic understanding of what we mean by critical theory, now this perspective has helped in understanding how oppressive structures and practices thrive in society. And in the contemporary times, many such social and economic practices were identified and studied by scholars. They have critically reflected upon the means by which thinking itself can be distorted by structures of domination. Now, this is a very alarming thing, because when they are making a study of the various social, economic and other practices which are so called prevalent in the contemporary society, they have also come to know that besides the structural domination, there are also multiple types of domination at the thought processes also. So, therefore, with the help of these perspective, that is interdisciplinary perspective, then by connecting philosophy with social sciences and also making a connection between the theoretical formulations and the practical scenario, they have been able to study various types of oppressive structure and practices even in the contemporary times. Now, this has been evident in various forms of critical theorizing that have emerged with respect to gendered oppression, racialism and colonialism and its legacies. So, we find that it is not that the relevance of critical theories have ended, but with the rise of new problems, the critical theories, they are continuously expanding the horizon and the scope of the critical theory. And we can see this especially with respect to the studies on gendered oppression, then studies on racism, studies on colonialism and its impact on the so called the people who have been the colonies. Indeed, various critical traditions have brought to light structures of domination and modes of thinking, whether in the form of patriarchy or in the form of white supremacy, new colonial and also the West centrism, which have until recently been neglected by the Frankfurt School. So, it is not simply only the problems have been associated with capitalist society, but there were other areas also which were not given much importance. Maybe it was not possible for them to give importance or to study all the aspects or types of oppression and exploitation at multiple levels in the society. Because we know that patriarchy was still there when they were making a study of the capitalist system, and how patriarchal relations have led to so much of gender discrimination and exploitative practices in the society, how they have been responsible for so much of exploitation and oppression in the society. So, these important forms of domination and oppression have not been studied earlier by the Frankfurt School. Then the question of white supremacy, white male biases, which we have seen in the case of science and technology or in the field of the traditional epistemology, how that dominates. Then the new colonialism, how we find the re-emergence of colonialism in multifarious forms even in the present times, especially in the form of cultural imperialism, in terms of colonization of our mind and thought processes. These are the new emerging forms of new colonialism. So, we have to study that. Then all the dominant perspectives or concepts of social sciences have come from the West, and they are dominating the discourse. These West centered perspective may not be relevant for the so called the developing society or the people who are from the non-West. Are they universal in the true sense of the term? Whether they can be universally applied? And we know that, for example, the notion of human rights, which has been considered as essentially a Western concept. How the concept of human rights, which has come from the West, having a very specific features of Western society, can be applied on a non-Western society, which is having a very different features, like it is a communitarian society. So, we have to understand that there are multiple alternative modes of thinking, non-Western modes of thinking. So, this Western dominance over ideas, over theories, over epistemology has not been given earlier much importance by the Frankfurt School of Critical Thinkers. But now slowly various scholars are giving importance, and they are talking about these issues, and important work has been done on these issues. Now, these and other perspectives are to be taken into account if any theory is aiming to be critical and emancipatory. So, a theory, if it is claiming to be critical and emancipatory, then it has to address all types of oppression and domination in the society. Otherwise, its relevance, its value in the society will not stay in the same manner as it was earlier. It has to prove its relevance by addressing the new and emerging challenges in the society. So, therefore, if these perspectives are taken into account, then only a theory can become truly emancipatory and critical in nature. Now, we will understand this with the help of some examples. Many feminist theories have argued that engaging feminism is crucial to renewing Frankfurt School a critical theory, both at the level of methods and in order to live up to its emancipatory aims. Now, various feminist theories have argued that the Frankfurt School scholars, they have to engage with the issues of feminism, because that is one of the major, you can say, theory which analyzes a very important form of oppression in the society, which is experienced by almost half of the population on earth. So, therefore, they say that in terms of method and in terms of its emancipatory aims, the Frankfurt School critical theorists have to engage with the feminist issues. First generation Frankfurt School thinkers, with the exception of Marcuse in the 1970s, have failed to recognize or theorize about gender based oppression or engage with feminist movements. So, only with the slight exception of Marcuse, we find that the gender based oppression has not been touched upon by the first generation Frankfurt School thinkers, which is in a way, you can say, can be a source of criticism also. Even among the, if you take the second generation thinkers, and among the second generation thinker, a very important name is Habermas. Habermas has also been critiqued for failing to adequately theorize gender in his very important work, which is the theory of communicative action. So, you find that it is not only among the first generation critical theorists, among the second generation, where we find that the issue of gender is not so much discussed. But with regards to the third generation of the Frankfurt School, we find various prominent feminist theories like Fraser and Ben Habib, have tried to link critical theory to feminism from within the tradition. So, this is a very important development, and it shows that how the so called the contemporary critical theorists, they are expanding the horizon of the Frankfurt School. Frankfurt School theorists are also focusing on ecological issues, crisis, and how the humanity is imperiled by ecological devastation, because I have just said that ecological devastation, ecological crisis is, I think, the biggest crisis being faced by humanity today. And Frankfurt School theories, they are rightfully engaging with this issue on a very serious note. Some critical theorists, they have argued for, and they have tried to explain this process with the help of a concept which is known as the critical naturalism. Others argue for a fundamental rethinking of the Western conceptions of human freedom. We know that Fraser focuses on the role of capitalism in the climate catastrophe and the need for eco-politics to be anti-capitalist. So, we find that various set of scholars are giving their own interpretation, own analysis to the ecological crisis which humanity is facing today. Now, what are the limitations? Now, after understanding some of the prospects and how the horizon of critical theory is expanding, now we will see some of the important limitations of critical theory. Some say that critical theories use dense concepts and language that make it hard for others to understand. It uses some of the very technical and complex terms which are not understood or understandable by the common people, and therefore, the theories cannot be understood and it cannot be utilized for their own benefit by the common people. Huggs and Huggs argue that Habermas' theory of ideal public discourse says much about rational talkers talking, but very little about actors acting. So, there is much talk, but there is very less action is the message we get from this criticism. Then they have failed to provide rational standards for justifying themselves that they are better than other theories of knowledge, science and practice. So, this is also one of the important criticism which has been labeled. They are considering themselves to be superior, but though they have provided various explanations that they are superior to other so called traditional theories, but those are not very much accepted as the justificatory ground for considering them as better from other theories. Potential weakness of critical theories is their dependence on social values. Now, values are subjective in nature, so when they conflict, the question arises whose values are better and who decides the values. These are some of the pertinent questions which has to be answered when we are talking about the fact that the critical theories are subjective in nature. So, with this we come to the end of our understanding of critical tradition and critical theory in week 1, followed by certain activity questions like what is the difference between the narrow and broader understanding of critical theory, why there is need to broaden the scope of Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, what are the various limitations of critical theory. So, with this I come to the end of this lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.